Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. A very warm welcome to the 2020 ALC Kings Africa Debates, which this year is titled Africa's Dual Challenge, the Climate Change Crisis and Conflict in the Sahel. But before we delve into the action, I'll just give you a bit of a background on what today's exercise is about and how it kind of fits into the work of the African Leadership Center. So the center is located both here at King's College London and as an academic center. It offers two master's programs, the Leadership Society and Development and Leadership and Development, and is also located in Nairobi, where some of the fellowship programs that the center offers are based, as well as, we do a lot of research that's also based there. And so today's exercise is a core part of the training that the fellows receive within the center's flagship programs, which have been running for more than 10 years. So we have the Peace and Security Fellowships for African Women and the Peace, Security and Development Fellowships for African Scholars. And we've also recently, we now offer the Peace, Security and Development Early Career Fellowship Program. So all of these fellowships offer academic training on leadership, peace and security. Whilst the Women Fellowship brings African women at the early stages of their careers to undertake training at the ALC in Nairobi, as well as the Early Career Fellowship, which brings young women and young men at the early stages of their career in Nairobi. Whilst the African Scholars Fellowship brings junior academics based in universities in Africa to come to King's and do a master's program. So therefore, the simulations are a high-level role-play session where fellows debate and act out roles of key personalities involved in the management of significant security situations in Africa. And it's a great opportunity for fellows to display what they've been learning over the past 6 months. So usually a different variety of perspectives and their capacities to critically engage with the public in that way. This year, we have fellows from the Gambia, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, and South Sudan. And these simulations would not be possible without the guidance and expertise of our ALC mentor, Desmond Davis, who's a former editor of West Africa magazine in London. And he's originally from Sierra Leone, but he's been a journalist and a commentator on African affairs for more than 40 years. He's currently London Bureau Chief for the Ghana News Agency and a mentor in strategic communication for political leadership at the ALC. Thank you, Desmond, for being here with us. He will lead the first panel, which is on climate change, a global challenge, an African problem. And I'll quickly introduce the fellows. So playing Andre de Ruyter, CEO of Eskom, the South African electricity provider, is Ikran from Kenya. Playing Leah Namugwera, Ugandan 15-year-old activist, is Chimwemwe from Malawi. US President Donald Trump is Margaret from South Sudan. And playing Anthony Nyong'o, Director for Climate Change at the African Development Bank, is Ivy from Kenya. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, the climate change debate has been going on, and it's even hotting up. Africa is caught in the middle, and Africa is also marginalized. Africa needs energy to develop, but then it's been told not to use its natural resources to develop energy. Africa is suffering from energy poverty. To discuss these burning issues, we have Andre de Ruyter, the Chief Executive of Eskom, the South African electricity provider, Anthony Nyong'o, who is in charge of global funding at the African Development Bank. We have Leah Namugwera from Uganda, who's a young 15-year-old climate activist, and President Donald Trump from the US. We'll start off with opening statements from Andre de Ruyter.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I thank the ALC, the African Leadership Center, for this invitation for today in this important forum of climate change. As I recently took office as the CEO for ESCOM, the national supply for electricity in South Africa, we are currently facing a huge task to provide stable power in the country, and the situation is having a negative effect on our economy. We use coal mainly to generate power in the country, and this is getting harder for us because of the climate change activists. But as our President Cyril Ramaphosa said at the AU Summit in Addis this week, South Africa will be able to use, will have to make a planned transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy tailored to national circumstances. This is what we'll do while making use of appropriate technology to mitigate the effects of climate change.
Anthony Young.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel among my esteemed colleagues. African Development Bank is on top of climate change issues and constantly reviewing policies to ensure we have energy in Africa and at the same time mitigate the effects of climate change.
Leah Namaregwa.
Firstly, I would like to thank the African Leadership Center for the invitation to this important discussion today. I'm a 15-year-old climate activist from Uganda. I am here to represent other young people in Africa and around the world. We want to live a healthy life free from the climate crisis. And so I am here to ask our African leaders and international leaders to take action toward climate justice. I issued a petition this week at the World Urban Forum today, asking the Director of the UN Habitat and Deputy Director of the United Nations Environment Program to be the first international meeting to declare an emergency. And so I ask you all here to use your power, to use your influence, to take and create serious action toward climate justice.
President Trump.
Thank you to the ALC for having me. As the leading economy of the world, I'm happy to be here to share in optimism. We're building the world's most prosperous society. We have achieved energy independence. For years, politicians told Americans that a strong economy and a vibrant energy sector were incompatible with a healthy environment. But that's wrong. We're proving the opposite. I'm glad to be here to share the American success story and to bring positivity to the subject. We must unite in shutting down all these prophecies of doom and the predictions of the apocalypse so that we can focus on bringing true wealth and prosperity to our people.
President Trump, when you took over power in 2017, you told you suggested to the multilateral development banks that they should support coal-powered energy in Africa using clean technology, but that doesn't seem to have happened. Why is that?
I did my best for Africa. I advised the multilateral banks to invest in coal in Africa because I knew it would help their economies. I'm a smart guy. I know these things, but they didn't listen to me. Sad.
Anthony Young, yes, indeed. I mean, until recently, the African Development Bank was supporting the use of coal for energy. All of a sudden, you backtracked. Why?
At the African Development Bank, we take environmental concerns seriously. So we are looking to leverage how we can use technology to capture carbon and also mitigate the effects of climate change and also invest more in renewable energy.
Members of the audience, please feel free to ask questions, say who you are and who you're representing. Andre de Ruyter, South Africa is the 14th largest emitter in the world and the largest emitter in Africa. What defense do you have for that in insisting on using coal to provide power in South Africa?
ESCOM is the #1 electricity supply company in Africa that's trying to use clean coal technology. And in our Kusile Unit 1 power plant, we have installed the technology that's called the wet flue gas sulfurization. So what it does is that it removes sulfur dioxides and carbon emissions from the air and then makes it easier for transportation.
So you're investing in carbon capture technology?
We're investing in carbon capture technology. in the Kusile Unit 1 power plant in Eskom.
Leah, as a young 15-year-old, how do you feel being thrust into the limelight of the climate change?
Firstly, Africa produces only 4% or less than 4% of the total global carbon emissions. And therefore, we need to take action that is equitable. International leaders, the US, China, Europe, India, Mexico, need to take the equitable action which they're committed to into the Paris Agreement. The reason why young people are demanding for climate action is because adults are not providing leadership. They're not offering leadership.
But how effective is your activities? How effective are they? Are you delivering?
Yes, we are. We are young and we are working within where we can. I am here because I'm here because we are working in solidarity across the world. In Uganda, last year on my birthday, I planted 200 trees and I started the birthday initiative. So instead of celebrating your birthday any other way, you plant trees instead. So far, we have gifted 3,000 trees and 3,000 trees. We are also cleaning the shores of the Lake Victoria, and we are working with the fishermen around there to bring awareness about climate change.
But are your voices being heard? Because your colleague Vanessa, who was in Davos, she was edited from a photograph which included Greta Thunberg. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that climate injustice and racism are not different. They are actually the same. We continue to ignore certain people that are affected by decisions that are made by selfish people. Vanessa is not the only person that has been erased from global coverage and media coverage, and her cropping was only a picture of what is happening. Since she has been cropped out, there's been many more people that have come out to stand in solidarity with African young activists, and we will continue to demand for climate action.
Anthony Nyong, you keep going on about using renewable energy, but in Africa, like for example, Lake Tana, which provides 60% of hydropower in Kenya, it is drying up. How do you contend with this sort of vagaries in the weather that might affect the environment?
The beauty of the continent is that we are endowed with God-given resources. So the depletion of Lake Tana just provides an opportunity for us to tap into alternative sources of energy. For example, we are also we are tapping into wind energy in Turkana, which is the largest in Africa. Across the Sahel, we are funding a project to light Africa, which is the Desert to Power initiative. So we are diversifying, even as we look to using and investing in more renewable energy. We are also diversifying and at the same time using energy mix, and that's where our partnership with Eskom comes in, because we are also funding projects which are looking to capture carbon and technology.
Yes, but with wind and solar, you'll be disrupting the lives of rural people. How do you reconcile that?
The African Development Bank only provides solutions which countries have told us are a priority to them. We use the nationally determined contributions, and this is where individual countries give us the priority of areas they feel that the AFDB could fund, and that's what we use in terms of providing sustainable solutions.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Piers Morgan, and I come from the United Kingdom. And thank you, Your Excellency Donald Trump. I hope you drive sense into the people sitting on your table. My question goes to Leah. You're 15 years old. Why are you not in school? I mean, you should be in school playing with your mates. Why are you coming here to speak about climate change? Like, you have a very long future ahead. My advice to you is that go back to school and let this issue of climate change continue. And to the gentleman from African Development Bank, just even looking at your hair, the chemicals you've put there are affecting the environment. So I don't know, when you come here to speak about climate change, and recently the FDB cancelled the coal plant in Kenya, yet we all know that there is no country that has industrialized without coal energy. What are you trying to tell the African continent? Thank you.
Yes, Leah.
Thank you for your question. I think it should shock the world that young people are choosing to strike from school to fight for climate action. What do people need to do for leaders to take practical action? Scientists have been talking about climate change for over 30 years. I am only 15 years old. I go to school from Mondays to Thursdays. I catch up with my work. On Fridays, I strike for climate action. And the reason I'm striking for climate action is because we are experiencing climate change and extreme weather events in Africa and in Uganda and around the world. Recently, we had drought in East Africa, which was followed by floods. In Somalia alone, they had rainfall in one day that should have come over 2 years. And that was followed by locusts. The locust swarms measured 60 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide and destroyed crops. As we speak here, the locusts have moved from, have crossed over from Kenya into Uganda. And that means the crop that farmers had grown this year is going to be destroyed. We have all heard what is happening in Australia. There's been fires. In Oslo, the temperatures in January were 25 degrees Celsius above what they are supposed to be. On 7th February, in the Antarctica, they recorded 18.3 degrees Celsius as their temperature. And that has never happened before. We are facing a crisis. Humanity is facing a crisis, and we need action now.
Why you as a 15-year-old?
Hey, Mr. Moderator.
She goes to school on Mondays to Thursdays.
Why are you not in school?
No, she's demonstrating on Fridays.
I demonstrate on Fridays.
Yes. Just now, Anthony Young, about your hair.
I think where we go wrong as Africans is because we deviate a lot from what's important. At the moment, my hair should not be a point of focus, but the issues that people in the Sahel, for example, the climate and the droughts, the locusts that my colleague Leah has just mentioned, that is what we should be focusing on. And as the African Development Bank, we are taking environmental concerns very seriously, and that is why we are investing and partnering with industries which use technology to capture carbon in order, as Africa, not to join the contributors of the biggest emitters in the world.
But do you agree that the chemicals you use in your hair affect?
I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce. Let's stay on track.
Did you ask a question to President Trump?
No, he's my idol.
That's a good guy.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Moderator, it is participants like this that glorify heads of state. I do not even want to say a president like Trump, that divert attention from the progress of the world. My name is Elizabeth Muriguri. I'm from the leading think tank in Nigeria. I think there's a serious issue before us. What I want to acknowledge that the gentleman said, which he should have focused on more strategically, is that every individual should take personal responsibility as well for this serious, grave atrocity of our times, which many of these states have contributed to, including Mr. Trump, who's sitting there. The more important thing, though, is we have an African Development Bank that is ready to at least support some of the really laudable efforts on the continent. But this African Development Bank, at the end of the day, you still seem to be under the control of countries like the United States and others outside of Africa, and you copy exactly some of their methodologies. When will you listen to the voices of non-state actors, young individuals, who are doing their best to draw attention to this egregious situation? Now, one of your member states, their leading city, Lagos, for example, is predicted to be sinking rapidly. It will be under sea level by 2100, it is being estimated. What are you doing apart from things like windmills and all the classical examples that you have heard? But I want to suggest, however, that we should not have a Donald Trump around the table that is holding the rest of the world. You're holding the rest of the world hostage when we have 55 member states on the continent of Africa that should be acting differently. This is the point of this whole thing. I do not understand how this panel is even allowing this kind of participation. Thank you so much.
Anthony Young.
What we are doing in terms of including young voices, we have several projects in Africa. For example, in Rwanda, 2 projects going on, and in different parts of the continent, we have, for example, the fashionomics. We are bringing voices, young voices on board because we know, and they are the leaders of today in terms of driving change and driving the economy forward. And in terms of the being reliant on countries from the West, yes, they do fund some of our projects, but at the same time, we do not bend over backwards to what the needs or the demands they have for us, because at the same time we have to recognize their contribution to making the continent suffer the most effects in climate change. They have to also leverage on things and issues and priorities that African as independent states want to focus on in order to mitigate the effects of climate change.
But you are not necessarily, you said they contributed, they're also creators of some of these problems. To what extent do you challenge them? Do you ever challenge people like Trump on your table?
Excuse me.
I was not directly.
I'm talking to you. Excuse me. That was a really, really, really rude thing to say. The U.S. is the leading economy in the world. We are doing so much for the environment, but we are right now. We are the leading economy in the world. Excuse me.
I'm not excusing you.
But to be honest, Donald Trump, that's why he's been complaining about the media. When he came to power in 2018, he gave tax breaks to companies to spend money on carbon capture technology, which even the Democrats also supported. The environmentalists are supporting it too.
Mr. Moderator, are you speaking for Mr. Trump?
The U.S. is doing great things for the environment. I'm an environmentalist. We have the cleanest air, the cleanest energy. We have the cleanest water.
Mr. Moderator, why are you allowing this kind of thing? A person who does not believe in climate change.
Excuse me, fake news. We don't want to listen to her anymore.
Under the Reuters. Yes, President Ramaphosa is now head of climate change at the African Union. How will that affect your own operations in South Africa?
I think we are very proud to have our president to be the head of Climate Change Committee, and that's going to be a good thing for us, since we'll be contributing to the national investment in terms of clean coal technologies, and we hope the African Union will contribute and support us to have clean coal mechanisms, since we have coal in abundance, and that's the main electricity supply that we use in the country.
Anthony Young, there are 600 million people in Africa without easy access to electricity. Why don't you use the natural resources that the continent has to ensure that electricity, which is very, very important, is provided? Africa has 35 billion tons of coal reserves that will last for 122 years. Why don't you use these coal reserves using the available technology?
We actually we are using natural resources, and for example, as mentioned before, in the Sahel, we are tapping into the solar power to power the G5 Sahel. We have started in Burkina Faso, where the Yelin project is ongoing. It has started. Young people are diversifying into the economy. Businesses are thriving. So yes, we are using alternatives. At the same time, as mentioned before, we are investing in ESCOM to use technology and invest in industries which capture carbon. So yeah, we know that we have reserves of carbon, and we do need carbon as a continent to develop, and that is our approach.
Yes, Leah, what's your own view on technology to capture carbon in the atmosphere? Because you're more or less talking about trees and that sort of thing. What about the technology?
Our
demand is simple. We are asking for climate action. We are asking for sustainable development. We are asking for sustainable technology. And what sustainability means is that it should not be at the expense of our future.
Okay, we will now have closing statements from Andre de Ruyter. Oh. I was just waiting for more questions. Yes? No, we've been open for questions. Feel free to ask.
Mr. Moderator, the question is not directed towards Mr. Trump, so it will be, I would appreciate if there's no noise coming from that side. I want to ask us, the Africans around the table, this young African who has committed Fridays to protesting, what concretely are you asking African leaders to do apart from the norm? But also, ESCOM, you keep talking about the African Union. Why are you looking towards an African Union that has so many challenges that it has set a 2063 agenda that is barely moving towards? 2020 was supposed to be the year of silencing the guns. Nothing has happened. Why is it African Union you're looking to and not your citizens? Why should you also be asking Africans, especially the young women? I know it's a huge responsibility on your shoulder. You've taken it on yourself. But what is it that is different that we're asking Africans to take responsibility for? We cannot blame the US. We cannot blame all of these developed countries forever. What are we going to take responsibility for? Protest for the sake of protest does not really make much sense. You have to be able to push these leaders in a particular direction that will lead to change. Maybe tell your colleagues that, but ESCOM, why do you always look to state actors around issues like this?
Leah, can you answer first, please?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question. Many young people around in Africa, in different countries, in Burkina Faso, in Malawi, in Uganda, across Africa, are asking for specific things specific to their countries. I will mention a few that I know of. The Zambian government is selling the mukula tree. The mukula tree is an endangered species. It is a rosewood tree. It is a hardwood tree. Between 2009 and 2014, imports into China of this tree increased by 1,300%. It is estimated that at least every hour, 350 logs were imported into China. China is not the end user. We are the end user. We are asking that, that the Zambian government stop selling this tree because it is illegal to sell it. That is specific to Zambia. And that goes for Congo forest. We all know the minerals and the natural resources that are in the Congo forest. We are asking that the laws, the sanctions that have been passed before should be enforced. And that is on the part of African leaders, African Union, regional bodies, but also the international leaders themselves, which are supposed to uphold the Paris Agreement. In my own country, we are asking President Museveni to ban plastics. In Rwanda and Kenya, they've been able to do this, and we're asking that the Ugandan government bans plastics in the country. And that goes for other countries as well. They're asking for specific things. But generally, it is really, all this is documented in the Paris Agreement. And therefore, the real demand is that countries take their equitable action as outlined in the Paris Agreement.
Thank you, but the man sitting next to you does not even acknowledge the Paris Agreement. And that is a big issue. And why would you even having someone like that in the handle without challenging them very seriously? I expect that you will be challenging this person very seriously for slowing the progress of the world on this issue.
Hi, afternoon. My name is Amanda Task. My question is to Donald Trump. I'm a concerned citizen of your country. You say that climate change is hocus pocus, yet we know that climate change affects the economy, which you claim we're the leading economy in the world, Morgan Stanley last year released a report saying that climate change disasters have cost America $415 billion over the past 3 years, and especially in states in the Midwest where they're contributing to the economy through agriculture, which is increasingly being affected by climate change, and yet you're claiming we're the largest economy, we're growing. What is your response to this? How are you going to mitigate the fact that climate change is affecting the economy, is affecting your citizens?
Since I've gotten it into power, my government has created many, many jobs for the American people. My government has created many, many jobs for the American people.
Yes, you've created jobs, but what about our lives? What about loss of housing, loss of lives? What are you doing about that?
I care about the American people, and I care about the American economy, and I care about American jobs.
And what are you doing on this panel, really? Do you care about what's happening globally and how that's affecting the continent of Africa? Why are you here?
I am here to share in optimism. I am here to give you hope, because the conversations around climate change have been all about doom. We're here to give you hope. I'm here to give you optimism for the future, for the possibilities of the future.
And of course, his government is investing on carbon capture technology.
I need to answer
Yeah, on Andre de Ruyter, yes.
On the question on why ESCOM is looking out for other countries or the African Union for support, I think climate change issue in Africa has been a burden to all of us, and 2 to 9% GDP of the country is addressing actually extreme climate change issues. And for ESCOM, we already have problems in facing the power cuts in the country. So we are trying to first focus on our issues and try to at least work on the power plant that has been having lack of poor maintenance in the past, which has caused a lot of households in South Africa to have issues with the electricity. So what we need to do at the moment for us as ESCOM is to work internally to be able to provide electricity. And how we are doing this is through the operational stability plan, which is to provide electricity across South Africa. So we need to work on our power plants, take individual power plants offline, work on them, repair them, so that we can restore them when they are stable, reliable, and predictable.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have to interrupt. My name is Xoliswa Vuyekaba, and I'm a reporter from the Sowetan. I think this, what we are being told by ESCOM is all lies, and is just, you're trying to manage us, and I think it's not acceptable. Together with the African Development Bank, I think you need to be very honest on this panel. As others have said in this room, we have a young person here who has come to really talk about the work that they are doing and the efforts they're making as young people. I think it's unacceptable that men in suits can sit here and tell us lies about what is happening. The situation in South Africa is deplorable. ESCOM, you are riddled with corruption. And I think you need to sit here and tell us. No, I think it's very important, Mr. Moderator. It's important to this discussion about climate change, because the things that South Africa itself is not exempt from climate change. Drought, flooding, snow at times when there shouldn't be snow. So I think, sir, please can you tell us what real actions, what real steps are you doing to repair? These are things that will take forever to resolve. And yet South Africa has not moved towards advancements in providing electricity and providing power. AFDB, you are contributing to corruption. Please tell us what you're going to do.
But Andre de Ruyter has just taken over to turn ESCOM around. ESCOM was full of corruption, but he has
But he has stepped into the position, and he needs to tell us what he's going to do and what he will do to deal with the rot in ESCOM. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms., for your question. I think as ESCOM, since I came to the office, what I'm trying to do right now, working closely with the government, is to break down the utilities for production. So like having the generation and transmission and production separately, so they can be working independently, and we could be having like enough production for electricity for our society. Initially, it used to be together. The three production companies used to be together, but now we're trying to break down these entities, and the process of breaking down these entities is working. The first week of the.
But we have heard that the climate crisis is urgent. It is a now crisis. Everything you're telling us is about, oh, these things will come, they will come. Please, we need solutions, and we need solutions.
We were having a meeting with our board of directors to be able to break down this the entities that I'm trying to speak about. So what we're trying to...
Meetings with boards of directors, more men in suits who are not bothered about young people like Leah, who we have on this panel. Thank you.
I think what we need to have as ESCOM is to first work with our own facilities, be able to bring them accountable, so that they can be transparent to provide electricity for South Africans. So we are working closely with the government, and we are a transparent company to provide power cuts to reduce the power cuts in the country.
Yeah, because the reality, if there's no electricity in South Africa, the economy will go down, you have more unemployed, and then you have violence.
May I interject and challenge the President of the United States, because as at the African Development Bank, we cannot operate without resources, and the US is a country which not only has not honored the pledge to inject funds into the Green Climate Fund, but you have also withdrawn, which means other countries in the West are following suit. And despite the commitments you made at the Paris Agreement, as the continent, we cannot move forward. Our hands are tied because we lack the resources. What do you have to say about that? We are not begging Trump. We are just asking Trump to honor the pledges he made.
But you have plans to set up a solar plant in the Sahara that will provide electricity to the whole continent. How feasible is that?
The solar plant is being funded by the EU, the European Union, and we are also partnering with African countries who have committed to fundraise and mobilize resources within their own institutions and insurance companies. However, we still need to do more because the climate crisis does not wait, it does not it does not discriminate, and that is why we need to put our hands together. We need to put our house in order as the continent to mobilize the resources, even as we await the countries who are the most offenders of climate to honor their pledges and commitments.
Leah, are you quite impressed with the way these adults are going around in circles about climate change?
The ones on our table or elsewhere?
On the table.
I have not seen the work that African Development Bank does. I am hoping that after this forum, I am going to have a discussion with Anthony Nyong to appreciate what he's doing in Africa practically, and for me to be able to see whether that is what is happening. I do know that South Africa is experiencing electricity shortage from other young people, and I do know that South Africa is the highest emits the highest level of carbon in Africa. And I'm hoping that as the president has now been selected into is now the chairperson of the African Union Climate Justice Committee, there will be actual action. And what we are looking for is action.
Yes.
Yes, my name is Julius Malema. I don't know why you brought this racist person here. Donald Trump, you are arrested, and you're not supposed to be here. And ESCOM, you are just agents of the Gupta brothers. You don't even deserve to be here. The only two people who are supposed to, actually it's just the moderator and my sister Ugandan in Uganda. All the rest of you should be back to your countries.
Listen,
what do you have to suggest then? Malema. So how do they resolve this?
The next
issue?
time you should not bring in these people, racist and agents of state capture. That's my point.
Okay. Yes, Donald Trump. What do you have to say about that?
I'm a globalist. I love all people. I love everyone.
I think
Yes, Eskom.
I think by now we need to understand on ways we can develop our economies as Africans, and we shouldn't throw that out of the window. What we need to look at as Africans is how we can revive these economies and using our own resources that is abundant in the country to be able to prosper our markets. So ESCOM being here today is just a way of sharing the clean coal technology we're trying to use so that other countries who have this coal to be able also to walk in our footsteps and be with us in this generation of looking out for clean and environmental friendly
Anthony
environment.
Young, is the African Development Bank funding work into carbon capture technology, because that has been proven to reduce the emissions greatly. Because it's said that by 2040, the world will have to deal with 2 billion tons of emissions every year. So there's a need for climate capture, carbon capture technology right now.
The FDP is open to funding industries which capture carbon, and that is a priority, which is why we are looking to work with ESCOM closely to tap into that technology.
Okay, we'll now have a closing statement from President Trump.
I would like to close by emphasizing that the environment is very important to me. The economy and jobs for the American people are also very important to me. I don't want to lose trillions and trillions of dollars and lose millions and millions of jobs over the myth of climate change. The alarmists want to control every aspect of our lives, but we will never let them interfere with our liberty. America is the home of dreams and opportunity, and we will always be the proud defender of freedom. We understand what the pessimists refuse to see, that a growing, vibrant economy lifts the human spirit strong enough to overcome any challenge, even the challenge of climate. Thank you.
Leah.
Once again, I would like to thank the African Leadership Center for this opportunity to be part of this discussion. Climate change is not an issue of the future, we are speaking of the present. An Oxfam report released in January indicated that a British person will produce, within the first 2 weeks, will produce more carbon emission than the annual carbon emission that will be produced by a person in Malawi, in Mozambique, in Uganda, in Burkina Faso. We are facing true carbon inequality. We are facing a climate crisis that has not been caused by young people, that has not been caused by people in Africa. We are, however, at risk. We are, however, most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I am therefore asking you here today to use your power, to use your influence to create serious climate action. Please sign my petition asking the UN Habitat and the United Nations Environment to declare a climate emergency. Thank you.
Anthony Young. Anthony Young.
Thank you for the stimulating conversation. The African Development Bank continues to be committed to supporting African countries to mitigate climate change. I have to emphasize that we must remain focused. Let's stay on track with the issues that are most important. Let us not deviate. Let us stay focused, and together we will realize a sustainable future for the continent.
Andre de Ruyter.
Ladies and gentlemen, I thank the African Leadership Center for inviting me today. At ESCOM, we are committed to ensure the security of electricity supply while contributing to the socio-economic development of the country. Obstacles that are in our way are not meant to stop us, but rather designed to put the way to a new route and new possibilities. At ESCOM, tackling climate change is a key priority, and we shall comply with environmental legislations as a minimum requirement in all our activities.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've just heard, environmental damage in terms of game theory is an example of the tragedy of commons, in which no one has a direct incentive to protect a public good, but everyone, especially Africa, is suffering the consequences. So it means that Africa has to take its own stand to ensure that it is not caught in the middle or left behind. Thank you very much.